congratulate you for bearing with us through these more difficult chapters. Okay, here we go. The Rambam begins, Davar Yadua or Barur. It is well known and obvious that although the calculations indicate that the moon should be sighted on a particular night, that's only probable. It is, however, possible that it won't be sighted because of other factors. For example, it might be cloudy, maybe a person might find themselves in a valley, or there may be a tall mountain in the west blocking view of the people in the place where they would be able to see the new moon, and it will be as if they're in a valley. In other words, we've just given solid calculations which will help us know definitively whether the new moon will be sighted or not, but that's bearing in mind that it's a clear sky and you have a clear view. But if it's not a clear sky and you don't have a clear view, then you won't see it, even though it's there. The moon probably won't be able to be sighted by a person in a low place, even if its crescent is large. And it will be possible for a person on a high and lofty mountain to sight the moon, even though it's very small. In other words, there are many other factors, and there's one other major factor, and that is the where the moon is, or where on planet Earth the person is looking at. Well, even that was taken into account because he spoke Israel. So I guess the terrain and weather may affect, or the how high or low the person is, and the weather will affect whether he does or doesn't see the moon. Similarly, sighting it will be possible for a person dwelling on the seashore or a person traveling on a ship in the Mediterranean Sea, even though its crescent is very small. So depending on where you find yourself will determine on whether you'd be able to see it. Similarly, in the rainy season, on a clear day, the visibility of the moon will be greater than it is in the summer. This is quite an interesting one. Listen to this. For on a clear day in the rainy season, the air is clear and the heavens appear more brilliant, more refined, because there is no dust clouding the air. In the summer, by contrast, the air is like smoke because of the dust. Therefore, the moon will appear small. Quite fascinating. So a clear day in the summer will not be as clear as a clear day in the winter, which is quite interesting. Now, when the two limits mentioned with regard to the arc of sighting and the first longitude are short, the crescent of the moon will be small, and sighting the moon will be possible only from a very high altitude. In other words, if we take the calculations we did in the previous chapters, and as a result of that, we understand that the crescent of the moon is very narrow, so then we understand that you've got to have good weather in order to see it. If the arc of sighting and the first longitude are long, and several degrees were added to the minimal limits, the moon will appear large. Its size and the extent of its visibility will increase according to the length of the arc of sighting in the first longitude. So based on what type of moon there is to be seen will determine under what weather conditions it will be able to be seen. If the moon will be very small, narrow, or short, then it will be only seen in good weather, as opposed to if it is larger and it's got a greater angle, a better angle, then you'll be able to see it even in weather that is not as good. Therefore, the court should always have its attention focused on the following two matters: the season when the moon was sighted and the place where the witnesses were located. In other words, so look at the season and the location. The judges should ask the witnesses, where were you when you saw the moon? For if the arc of sighting was short, and according to the calculations, there is only a limited opportunity to see the moon, then then it's less likely that they actually saw it. So if the Beis Din realizes that it is possible for it to be seen, but only under very good conditions, and then they ask the witnesses what conditions they were under when they saw the moon, then that will help the Beis Din determine whether the witnesses are telling the truth. For example, the arc of sighting was 9 degrees and 5 minutes, and the first longitude was exactly 30 degrees, and witnesses came claiming that they saw the moon. If this happened, in other words, the moon was really small and hard to see. If this occurs in the summer, or if the witnesses were in a low place, then we suspect the veracity of the testimony and subject them to much cross-examination. However, in the rainy season, I guess with a clear sky, or in a very high place, then the moon would surely be sighted unless clouds obscured it. So that is another phenomenon that is worth bearing in mind, meaning where were the witnesses located, and what was the weather? Was it a wintry day that has a clear sky, or a summery day that has a clear sky? Let's examine a hypothetical situation. Witnesses saw the new moon at the appropriate time. They came to the court, they gave testimony, the court accepted their testimony, and they sanctified it the first month. And they sanctified this first month. Okay, so day 30 was not day 30, because on day 30 new witnesses came, so day 30 became day number 1, which means that the Yom Tovim will be a day sooner, meaning that the Yom Tovim are going to be earlier in the season. Excuse me for a moment. Yeah, sorry. So that's what happened in the first month. Then they counted 29 days from the day that was sanctified. And on the night of the 30th, the moon was not sighted, either because sighting it was impossible or because it was cloudy. So the court waited the entire 30th day, as we have explained, and witnesses did not arrive. Therefore, they added a day to the month, and thus the Hachodesh of the second month was on the 31st day, meaning day 30 was still of month number 2, and day 31 became the first day of month number 3. So far, is that clear? Yes. They began to count 29 days from the day of Rosh Chodesh in the second month. We did this already. Did we do it? Yes, we did do it. They began to count 29 days from the day of Rosh Chodesh of the second month, but the moon was not sighted. If you would say that again a day should be added to the month, i.e. the following day would be the 30th of the month, and the 31st day should be Rosh Chodesh of the third month, an undesirable situation would arise. I'll explain what it means in a moment. For it is possible that the moon would not be sighted on the night of the 30th of this month as well, maybe cloudy. Thus, hypothetically, we could see an ongoing pattern in which a day is added and a new month begins after 30 days throughout the year. Thus, in the last month, it would be possible for the moon to be seen on the night of the 25th or the night of the 26th, which is too early. There could be no more ludicrous and demeaning situation than this. So let me see how I could simply explain this. Maybe I'll just pull out the calendar over here. So now we're looking at the year 2021. I'm going to actually switch to the year 5781. So we're looking at a Jewish calendar. So this is the first Jewish month, the second Jewish month. So we see this year, Tishrei had 30 days. It always has 30 days. Cheshvan had 29. Kislev also had 29. Okay. But then Teves had 30. Now we're in Shvat. Sorry, but then Teves had 29 as well. So both of these months had 29 days, which means that this year will actually have not 354 days. It's going to have 353 days. Interestingly, they had to even it out. These 2 months, Cheshvan and Kislev, are sometimes 29 and 30. Sometimes they are 30 and 30, and sometimes they're 29 and 29. We learned about that. Either way, so here we are. The Rosh Chodesh over here was on day 31. Here's the first day of the next month. Rosh Chodesh over here was a day 30. So that would be that Tuesday is already the first day of the next month. Rosh Chodesh over here again was a day 30. So that would already be the first day of the next month. Now, if you have the reverse, if in the time that we sanctified it by the sighting of the moon, if in this second month of Cheshvan, day 30 came and it was cloudy, so they didn't see the moon. So that would mean that day 1 would be not on Tuesday, but it would be on Wednesday. Okay. The next month, the same thing happened again. It was cloudy and they didn't see the moon. So now, as it is, we moved over it. So now it's 2 days behind, meaning that instead of Rosh Chodesh beginning on Wednesday, it's now only going to be starting on Friday because they didn't see the new moon. So they had to add a day. If this keeps happening month after month, then you're going to keep, okay, this month would be the same, but this next month again was only 29 days. So basically, it's going to turn out that by the end of the year, since you keep adding a day, instead of Rosh Chodesh, the new moon is showing up on Monday. But since you've added an extra 6, you've had an extra 6 months of 30 days, because remember, the lunar cycle is 29 and a half days. So since you've had, instead of having only 6 months of 30 days, you've had 12 months of 30 days. It means that the new moon will already be seen on Monday, but according to the count, they'll only be looking out for the moon 6 days later on Shabbos. Now that's ludicrous because nobody's going to, I mean, it's just completely off then. So therefore the Rambam is going to say that sometimes the Beis Din would need to, until now what we've said was that that a month will have 30 days unless witnesses arrived. If witnesses arrived on day number 30, then the month has 29 days. But otherwise, a month always has 30 days. But the Rambam says that since clouds can affect us, for example, and weather can affect us, if we're just going to go by sighting and we're going to say any month that the witnesses didn't come has 30 days, then we're going to be thrown off. Eventually, we'll be saying it's Rosh Chodesh 6 days late. Therefore, the Rambam will say that although until now we've said the only way that day number 30 will already be Rosh Chodesh is if there's witnesses, there is another scenario where the Beis Din will have to declare it Rosh Chodesh, even though there aren't witnesses because it's cloudy. Okay. Nor can one say that the hypothetical situation described that the moon is never sighted throughout the year is an infrequent occurrence. Don't say that this is rare, don't worry about it. The contrary is true. It's quite likely to take place. This often occurs in countries that have long rainy seasons and cloudy skies. So if you're living in London, for example, then you could go a good many months with cloudy skies, and then although the moon is there in the sky, the clouds are in your way. Well, the intent is not that the moon will never be seen throughout the year, but that it will not be sighted at the beginning of the month. It will be sighted only afterwards when it's too late. In certain months, it will not be sighted because sighting it is impossible. And in the months when sighting it is possible, it possibly will not be sighted because of the clouds. In other words, either the angle of the moon, which you discussed in the previous few chapters, will mean that the moon wouldn't be seen, or the weather will cause it not to be seen. So it's actually quite likely that a good few months will go by that the moon won't be seen. So, and as I said, if you're going to have month after month, all the months having 30 days, then the result will be that you'll be completely off. It means the moon will be on Monday and you'll only be looking for the moon 6 days later. These difficulties were avoided due to the following. Tradition which existed amongst our sages, having been transmitted from one to another in a chain extending back to Moshe, our teacher, and that is the following. In other words, we have a tradition to avoid this. When the moon was not sighted at the beginning of the month, month after month, the court establishes the following sequence. 1 full month with 30 days, 1 lacking month with 29 days. In this manner, they would calculate and establish 1 full month and 1 lacking month. So they'll do 1, 1, 1, 1, establishing these months but not sanctifying them. So they won't call it Rosh Chodesh because Rosh Chodesh would only be declared by witnesses, but they would still they would already start the next month a day earlier. For the sanctification of the months is dependent solely on the sighting of the moon. At times they would have a full month, follow another full month, or a lacking month, follow another lacking month, like I showed you is the case this year, depending on the result of the calculations. The intent of the calculations is always that it is possible to sight the moon in the following month at its proper time. So the goal is that Rosh Chodesh will be on the day when the new moon would actually appear, or on the night following the added day, but not to be sighted beforehand, i.e. on the night of the 28th. Through the sighting calculations mentioned above, it is possible for you to determine when it will be possible for the moon to be sighted and when it is possible that it will not be sighted. The court relies on similar calculations and accordingly establishes 2 full months in succession or 2 lacking months in succession. Never should there be fewer than 4 full months in a year. So you should never have less than a third of the months of the year having 30 days, nor should there ever be more than 8 full months. So a year should never consist of less than 4 full months and less than 8 or more than 8 full months. When a full month is established according to calculations, a celebratory feast is also made in honor of the full month, as mentioned previously in chapter 3. Okay. Now, new points. I see we're at 129, so we'll do as best as we can. Whenever you find statements in the Talmud according to which it appears that the court relies on computations rather than testimony of witnesses, like the scenario we just mentioned, again, whenever the court is relying on calculations rather than on witnesses, or that there is a chain of tradition extending from Moshe and Mount Sinai that this matter has been entrusted to them, and it is their decision whether to make the month lacking or full. And certainly the fact that during 1 year, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi declared 9 months as lacking, these and all similar matters are dependent on this principle and apply at a time when the moon is not sighted at the appropriate time. In other words, in simple English, what this means is if they realize that Rosh Chodesh is going to be off from when the new moon is, then they could use calculations and based on them determine when the new moon is, even without using witnesses. Certainly, the statements of our sages that a day is added to the month when necessary applies in an instance when a full month is declared according to the calculations, so that 1 month is made lacking and 1 month full. They have the authority to declare full months in succession, one after the other, and lacking months in succession. Only when the moon is not seen at the appropriate time does the court declare full months when necessary. When, however, the moon will be at its appropriate time, its first shining after its conjunction with the sun, it is always sanctified. So in other words, as long as the moon is on course with the calendar, then we have to rely on witnesses as long as we can. Nowadays we can't. But if the sighting of the moon is off from Rosh Chodesh, then they could use their calculations instead. All above concepts apply when there is a court that relies on the testimony of witnesses. In the present era, however, we rely solely on the calculations based on the mean or motion of the sun and the moon that are simple and widespread throughout Israel, as explained previously in these laws. So nowadays, where we no longer are able to accept testimony of witnesses, our calendar is based on calculations. It is explained in the text of astronomical and geometrical calculations that if the moon is sighted in Eretz Yisrael, here's an interesting fun fact, then it will also be able to be seen in all the lands of the world that are located to the west of Israel and at the same latitude to the west. So I guess that would be maybe like European countries. I don't know exactly what's immediately to the west of Israel, England or maybe Sweden. I don't know the map well enough. If the calculations indicate that the moon will not be sighted in Israel, sighting it is nevertheless possible in the lands to the west of Israel at the same latitude. Therefore, the fact that the moon is sighted in a country that lies west in Israel is not an indication whether it was seen in Israel. So that's an interesting fact. If, however, the moon is not sighted on the mountains of the countries located west of Israel that are at the same latitude, the moon surely was not sighted in Israel. So if even on the mountains they didn't see it, then they probably didn't see it in Israel either. Similarly, if the moon was not sighted in Eretz Yisrael, if it wasn't seen in Israel, then you could be sure that it wasn't seen to the east of Israel and at the same latitude. If the moon was sighted in Eretz Yisrael, there's no guarantee that it was seen on the east. Accordingly, if the moon was sighted in a country located to the east of Israel at the same latitude, the moon was definitely seen in Israel. If, however, obviously weather permitting. If, however, the moon was not sighted in a country that lies east of Israel, it still could be that it was seen in Israel. So that's some interesting facts as far as looking up at the sky from different countries around Israel. All above statements apply when the countries to the west and to the east of Israel are at the same latitude, as we said, as Israel, meaning they are 30 to 35 degrees north of the equator. If they are located in a more northerly position or in a less northerly position, then different principles apply, for they are not parallel to Israel. In the cities that are located to the east and west of Israel, the statements we made to clarify all the laws regarding the sighting of the moon to make the Torah great and glorious. In other words, as long as you're not actually in Israel, everything we said was only for the purpose, this is actually a real key phrase, to make the Torah great and glorious. In other words, although you may have felt like you're learning a whole lot of mathematics or astronomy, it's all part of Torah. Any chapter or any halacha that we learned to the Rambam in the last week was fulfilling the mitzvah of studying Torah. And therefore, even if it's not practical based on your location, you are still making the Torah great and glorious. We are understanding the greatness of the Torah. The intent is not that the people living in the east or the west should depend on their sighting of the moon or what their sighting should be of any consequence whatsoever. Meaning, if you're not living in Israel or nowadays, there's no halachic implication of everything that we've learned. Instead, we rely on the sanctification of the moon performed by the court in Israel, as we have explained several times previously or nowadays on the calendar, and therefore studying all these laws is what I call lishma, purely for the sake of connecting to Hashem, not in order to be able to help us fulfill the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh any better, but in order to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah in a unique way. Certainly,